Testing.
I could hear you just fine.
Quick test of my share screen. It's so hard because I can't tell what I'm seeing, but can you describe to me, Jane, what you see?
I see a row on the left-hand side of slides, and then in the middle is Waikiki Today with the play button.
Okay, cool.
I would try playing that though, just in case.
Did you want it to be full screen or?
Now reflects the racism and white supremacy of its time of.
There you go. You can hear that.
You know, I was thinking about, let me try full screen real quick. Sorry, I just came out of class and I meant to get here a little earlier. What do you see now?
Oh, it's still got a row on the left-hand side.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think the full screen works, but
can you go back to view? Because there was a presenter option.
Oh yeah. Oh.
There you go.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, that's the right one.
Cool. Awesome. All right. Thank you. Oh, stop share.
Super. Okay, great. Let me get this. Okay, so we have about 1 more minute. Maybe we could start letting people in. Be cool.
Yeah.
All right.
Sean, I was saying to Alex, it's nice to see you, or nice to see her. I'm like, hi.
It's nice to see all of you.
I'm on the phone and stuff, but I haven't seen you in so long. It's weird.
Here, let me get my, whoops. Let me do it on gallery. You can see all of us as people are coming in. Okay, we'll just let some more people come in really quickly. Okay, great. Just a few more. Okay. It's great to see you all. I see some artists that were part of the EcoArt salons from before, Leah Raintree, Beatrice Glow. It's fantastic to see you all. We're just going to give a moment for people to enter.
Peppermint.
Feel it.
Okay.
I almost feel more nervous presenting on Zoom.
Okay, so the EcoArt Salon is a very informal salon format. So we're all can see each other. But of course, when you're presenting, we'll be showing you. But it's meant to be that, you know, we'll talk to each other. And so relax a little bit. Normally it was done over dinner. Unfortunately, we cannot provide you the dinner right now.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that's why we actually try to limit the RSVPs a little bit. So sorry that sometimes like we can't get everyone in, but we do stream it on Facebook as well, and we're recording this. So, but we're trying to keep the working sessions, or the breakout sessions, a little smaller so people can really be in conversation. So, okay, well, perhaps we could get a little bit started now, because I want to make sure we have time for those discussions, actually. So, so welcome everyone to the EcoArt Salon. So it's hosted by the Paul Robeson Galleries at Rutgers University Newark, and supported by the Clement A. Price Institute. And today the EcoArt Salon is titled Environmental Justice from Mountain to Sea, a conversation with Sean Connelly and Jane Chun-Mi. I'm Alexandra Chang. I'm the Associate Director of the Price Institute, as well as of the American Studies program. And I also teach EcoArt here at Rutgers Newark. I'm also Zooming in from remotely from upstate New York, and I'm on the unceded territory of the Mohawk Nation. I wanted to acknowledge that Rutgers Newark is on unceded territory of the Lenape Nation, and also to acknowledge their community, including their past ancestors and future generations as well. Just going to let some more people in, sorry. And then I also wanted to mention that the EcoArt Salon is a free monthly gathering. So we come together every month, and hopefully, we could start building our community in which, you're welcome to come every month and talk and skip months that you're busy and then come back. But it's great to see some familiar faces that have been coming back as well. And so we're inviting you all to really join us to talk about environmental issues, as well as artists to share your projects, discuss issues, network, and collaborate together. So it's meant to be something that we can all meet each other. And so we're really excited to have the presenters and to be able to be in discussion with them also in the breakout sessions later on. So I also helped to organize the Global Asia Pacific Art Exchange at NYU. And I'm really glad actually to see some of those folks that are part of that here. And also, I just wanted to mention that I actually had met Sean Connelly as well as Jane Chun-Mi through that. So just to mention that, and to welcome the GAX folks. And I wanted to also mention that Sean is Zooming in from Honolulu, so thank you so much. And also Jane Chun-Mi is Zooming in from LA. And together they're going to be discussing the idea of, sorry for the pronunciation if it's not correct, ahupua'a in their works. Great, thank you. And asking us to follow a drop of water from the mountain to the sea through their conversation. So Jane's going to present about her work underlying the powerful enmeshed ties of community and the environment, and the current situation involving the fight for Mauna Kea. And also Sean Connelly will be presenting on his practice in terms of Hawaii and planetary futures, including in his important work, the Ala Wai Centennial. I'm just going to let a couple more folks in. And the format again is a salon. So we're going to hear first from Jane and Sean about their practice and their projects. And they'll present, and I'll ask a couple questions, but then, and that'll be on Facebook streaming, folks. And then we're going to stop the streaming. But like the folks that are in the Zoom room right now will break up into a couple of groups to join Jane or Sean. And you'll be able to select which group you want to be in. And we'll talk a little bit for 20 minutes, and then we'll come back to catch up and see what people were talking about. And then, that's the format for today. I did want to also mention that we're recording this, just so everyone knows. But we're not recording the working sessions, so you can say what you want to say. Okay, so welcome, Jane and Sean. I'd like to first introduce Jane. And Jane Chun-Mi is an artist, an ocean engineer. She assesses the post-colonial ocean environment through interdisciplinary research and examines the narratives associated with the underwater landscape, considering the past, present, and future. She most often focuses on the occupation and militarization of the Pacific Ocean by the United States. This interest emerges from her background as an ocean engineer, a field that is inextricably linked with the American military complex. In 2016, Mi was the inaugural artist in residence at the World War II Valor in the Pacific National Monument, researching the pre-contact history of Pearl Harbor. The project concluded as a part of the first Honolulu Biennial in 2017, and her work's been exhibited widely, and most recently at Te Uru Waitakere and St. Paul's Street Gallery in Aotearoa, New Zealand in 2019. And she's been a scientist in the Arctic Circle program and received a University of California Institute for Research in the Arts grant, and also was a fellow at the East-West Center at the University of Hawaii in Manoa. She's currently based between Honolulu and LA, and she's the assistant professor of media studies at Scripps College. So welcome, Jane. If you wanted to start with your presentation, and then we'll go to Sean.
I gotta share my screen, everyone. Bear with me. Okay. And so now I can't see you guys because it goes into slideshow. Okay. So aloha, everyone. Really extremely grateful and delighted to be invited to speak at the EcoArt Salon with Sean Connelly. Thank you, Alex, as always, for all of your support and hosting these salons and other conversations and conferences wherever I see you. So thank you. I'm grateful that you did the acknowledgement to the Lenni Lape, and then also being in Los Angeles, I'm on Tongva or often Chumash land, so wanted to make that acknowledgement. Sorry, I have notes on a different screen. Okay. So whenever I give talks for Alex for her class, I always seem to include a little personal history. So last year in our class, I shared a video of when I went to visit her class in New York at Rutgers. I shared a video of my child's first birthday where we went as a family to visit the Kuakia Mauna, or the Guardians of the Mountain on Big Island. I think these tidbits also kind of give a context to who I am. So I'm a first generation Chinese Taiwanese American, born in Massachusetts, but grew up in Los Angeles and Hawaii. My artist practice most often focuses on the occupation and militarization of the Pacific Ocean by the United States. And so this interest actually emerges not only because we're a part of the diaspora from World War II, but also my background as an ocean engineer. And this field is inextricably tied or linked to the American military complex. So in this picture that I'm sharing today, which I think is actually more relevant than ever, especially with the election, though hopefully most everyone has voted already. This is of my mom and my aunt protesting in 2016. During a time span of about 3 months in 2016, my mom went to every single protest in Los Angeles, including Black Lives Matter, No DAPL, and the list goes on. So she would like recruit us, all of us, like all the kids and also all of our family members, to go with her on the weekend. So every family member would accompany her, including myself and my partner, my aunts, my siblings. And she actually even took me to my first protest in 1989 to support the students' democracy movement in Beijing, because Tiananmen Square was happening back then. So this kind of helps to give context to my talk today. I actually want to focus on the Mana Wahine, or powerful women who have really like led the way in regards to protest in Hawaii. And I want to express that this talk is by no means comprehensive. I'm still learning myself, and I have a lot to learn. But I just hope that this talk inspires you to look further and learn from the kumu and kupuna, not only in Hawaii, but also in your own places and in your own environments. Oops, sorry. Okay, so the first work that I'm just going to mention kind of briefly is called The Spirit of Aloha. It's a collaborative project with photographer Ed Greevy. Ed is renowned actually for his multi-decade practice documenting community and activism in Hawaii. And from Ed's archive, signs of protesters were remade. So he's taken like a multitude of photographs over the years. And so from that archive, I would pick signs that I would see, and then the slogans on the signs were taken and posters were created. And so then these offset prints were made into tearable stack with endless copies for viewers to take. This work sought to highlight how history continues to repeat itself in both Hawaii and the United States. And as a state and a country, we seem to be revisiting the same issues we have had in the past. This was a part of the 2008 Contact Zone curated by Josh Tengen. So this work that you see here is actually one of 4 works, but because I'm focusing on the Mana Wahine, I wanted to focus on this one to give context to the general conversation that I would want to have today. This is Hunani K. Trask. Trask is a Hawaiian nationalist, educator, political scientist, author, and a professor emeritus at the University of Hawaii, Manoa. She is also the producer of the award-winning documentary Act of War, The Overthrow of the Hawaiian Nation. And here she's holding a sign that says, "This is Hawaii and you're not Hawaiian." This may feel somewhat inflammatory to some, but I think that this actually needs to be spoken. In the United States, too often we seem to forget that we are living and going about our day-to-day lives on stolen land, and the majority of us are actually settlers. This sign also reminds me, but I want to point out that in this photograph, Trask appears to be kissing a woman who's haole. And I think that's a really interesting thing to consider, because I'm about to show a video of her talking about what's happening here. Last night, I actually also wrote Ed to just kind of get his background on the photograph, or what he remembered. And so what he wrote to give context was, a philosophy grad student, a mainland haole, complained about being called haole and not being treated better as a white person in the UH student newspaper Kaleo. At the time, Hunani was teaching in American studies, and she wrote a blistering response in Kaleo. And so this protest was in the philosophy area of UH and pitted students supporting HKT against the philosophy grad student. It was one of several efforts made to fire Hunani, and she suggested in regards to the Kaleo essay that if he, Joey Carter, were unhappy being a haole in Hawaii, there were lots of United flights going back to the mainland every day. Even her boss, Seymour Lutsky, wanted to fire her. And eventually, actually, due to this incident, the Hawaiian Studies program developed out of this issue. She won, and she loved the fight. Carter eventually returned to Louisiana, I believe, Ed. And so now I'm just going to show an interview of her speaking about this incident.
Hanani K, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yes, well, I just would like to comment that it's very telling that the first thing you open the show with is a statement about Hawaiians would benefit from one less haole in Hawaii. That is what haoles always pick on. They never want to talk about the history. Oh, listen, this is my opportunity to speak, and now I'm going to speak. They never want to include the history. And as you know, because you have the article with you, that statement is made at the end of my argument. The argument is preceded by a defense of the word haole, which we need to start with Mr. Carter. Mr. Carter, who is a 32-year-old student, or was, is haole. He wrote into Kaleo, the student newspaper, saying he didn't like the word. He thought that the use of the word was haole bashing. That was part of his argument. My reply to him was a defense in the very first paragraph of that word. Why did I defend that word? Because the Hawaiian language was officially banned by an all-haole government, Bob, in 1900. That's very important.
I'm not disputing those historical
facts. Let me
facts.
have my say.
Let me say, I didn't like his letter any better than I like yours.
Let me have my say. You've had a long time to interpret what I said. I want to say to the listening, viewing public, what is consistently left out of my analysis. That includes what you left out, what the philosophy department leaves out, what everybody else leaves out. And that is the history of white supremacy, not only in Hawaii, but in the United States. I mentioned in that same article that in the American Constitution, blacks were 3/5 of a person. That was also left out by yourself and by other people. I mentioned genocide and removal of American Indians. I mentioned the fact that Asians were beaten because they were called a yellow peril, and that Japanese were interned during the Second World War, and that Native Hawaiians were dispossessed and their lawful government overthrown. Now, to leave all of those things out, and there are many other things that I haven't even mentioned about the contemporary status of Native Hawaiians, is really to inflame the response of the listening public who says, well, wait a minute, why did she say that? And my response is, I am saying that not only because it is historically and factually correct. Hawaiians would certainly benefit from less haoles in Hawaii. Many, not just one, but thousands, as Tahitians would benefit from less French, if it can't be no French, as the Maoris would benefit from no Pākehās, as American Indians would benefit from no white Americans, because those people are settlers in native lands. and they are living on stolen land. Now, my advice to Mr. Carter was, you had better learn where you are, which is the same advice I give to the philosophy department, which is in Hawaii. You are not in some white place, otherwise known as Europe. You're in a native place, and you are living on stolen land, so you have an obligation, number one, to understand the history of that place, which Mr. Carter does not want to understand, which Mr. Loudon of the philosophy department does not want to understand, and number two, you owe us something. Now, the question is, what do people owe us? Haoles owe us getting rid of their ignorance. They are so ignorant about Hawaii. They think they can fly here and say, oh, well, we're a numerical minority. We're unhappy here. Well, what I say to them is, learn where you are. You are not just off the coast of Southern California. You are in Polynesia, a stolen colony. That's what we are. We are a stolen colony. The United States has colonies. We are colonized people. Number two, learn the history. That's what I was trying to say to Joey Carter. Learn the history of white supremacy. Now, what does white supremacy consist of? Well, Mr. Carter didn't know this. Our language was officially banned. All Hawaiian language schools were closed. Who is Mr. Carter or any other white person to tell a Hawaiian we cannot use the word haole? That is our word. Now, white people don't like that because they're used to being the people who name other people. And so they come here and they think that that word is a bad word. They think it's pejorative. It's not pejorative, it's descriptive. Just like the name we have for Hawaiians is Nau'iwi in Hawaiian. We are the native people. The other thing haoles need to understand is what are the contemporary conditions that Hawaiians endure today. Continued land dispossession, continued water loss, continued bad health, which we just discussed last night. All of these things, haoles owe us. Just as if you went to Kenya, or you went to Tahiti, or you went to Palestine, you would owe those people there an understanding and a respect for their culture. And Mr. Carter has no respect for Hawaiians. So he complained about the word haole. He complained about being, what he said, imposed upon. And my response to him was, if you don't like it, you can leave.
Okay. So for me, though this interview is from 1990 and is past, what is considered the first Hawaiian Renaissance when George Helm and Walter Ritty occupied Kaho'olawe, I feel that this clip is probably the most succinct in describing the problems of white supremacy in America today, and also Hawaii, explaining how we arrive at problems such as the desecration of Mauna Kea, which I'm going to talk about next. So this is a project that I did in 2013. It's also actually kind of how Alex and I started conversing. It's of 5 different, I'm kind of going to jump in between them. There are actually 5 archival digital prints just of all the telescopes and all the antennas atop Mauna Kea. And so I'm just going to kind of read about the project itself. The Hawaiians, following in the footsteps of the Polynesian ancestors, rebuilt the voyaging canoes. They learned to navigate by the stars, following the old and traditional ways. Mauna Kea is a sacred mountain for Hawaiians. Wakea is most often translated as Sky Father, and Mauna Kea is considered his home. Mauna Kea or Mauna Kea is also home to the 13 international observatories that look out into the heavens. Currently, the astronomy community is hoping to build an additional 30-meter telescope, TMT, on the mountain, a project that has been met by local and native Hawaiians with much protest. Hawaii has had a long and tumultuous history with the United States, beginning in 1893 when Queen Liliuokalani was overthrown with the help of the US Marines and was forced to surrender Hawaii to the United States. By 1896, the Hawaiian language was banned, and by 1899, Hawaii was annexed by President McKinley. In 1900, Hawaii became a US territory, and in 1941, the US military base at Pearl Harbor was bombed by Japan. In 1959, Hawaii was made a state of the United States of America. This illegal and militarized occupation establishes Hawaii as a colonized land. Scientific colonization began in 1968 when the US Air Force built the first telescope atop Mauna Kea. By 2002, 13 telescopes had been built. Scientific colonization is problematic because it is a repeat of colonialism, yet in a more subtle and disguised form, using science to justify the use of land. Specifically in the case of Mauna Kea, there has been much question as how the TMT project will further desecrate the sacred. Moreover, there's a lack of acknowledgement in the scientific community that these astronomical discoveries are happening on Hawaiian land. That's changed recently, as there was a comment that was given a Hawaiian name, but in regards to overall, there's really no acknowledgement that a lot of these discoveries happen on Hawaiian land. This then begs the question, why are people who are not natural or local stakeholders of the land given excessive decision-making power about how to use land? And so this is another project. I don't get to visit Big Island as much as I would like to, but I do try to go at least once a year. And so some of these projects are involved in those types of things, but often I also make work that is like multiplicity. So you're only seeing kind of like a small section of kind of the greater body of work, because one of the things about my work is because I'm talking about things that are very layered and complex, often works have to talk to each other. So I apologize that you're only seeing photo series today, but I look forward to speaking later when we're kind of more salon style about this. So this is a more recent project that also involves the observatories on Mauna Kea. I'm still working on it. I started it in 2015 and it's called 589 nanometers. It's actually a part of a greater project called The Physicists Have Known Sin about scientific colonization. So these photographs depict the nightscape of Hawaii, Big Island, and is dominated by sodium vapor lights with a wavelength of 589 nanometers. The orange-hued streetlights are preferred by the astronomers at Mauna Kea observatories. The lights are advantageous for two reasons. First, they emit a single wavelength, allowing astronomers to readily filter the wavelength out of their data and measurements. Secondly, the lights are also extremely powerful, emitting more light per watt than halide or mercury lights. Thus, the lights save the county of Hawaii and the taxpayers who pay the power bill for all these lights a substantial amount of money. But what's also really disturbing about this is that the entire landscape of Big Island at night is like just in this orange hue. And yes, you have this like in some areas, and in some areas in the United States, you know, like in Malibu, for instance, in California, they will have like a no lights at all. But the fact that this entire island, which is huge, right? It takes like 3 or 4 days to really drive around Big Island. I guess you could do it in a day if you were driving all 24 hours, is dominated by these lights because of Mauna Kea. So it's not just the top of the mountain that you're having a conversation about, it's the entire landscape of the island. And so in pairing these two works today, I'm kind of trying to point out that these things really don't affect just the location that they're from, but like we're talking about with ahupua'a, they affect the entire landscape. I'm not actually talking about the TMT protests that have been going on for the last 2 years so much, but I'm going to draw on some testimony that Dr. Pualani Kanakaole Kanahela, she gave testimony to, I believe it's the city council, but I'm not completely sure, about Mauna Kea and it's important. She also shares about ahupua'a in it, and talks about water and the way that water travels from the tip of a mountain into water basins and also to the Wai. So I thought it would be important to hear her description, as she is a knowledge holder. Every time I hear her speak, I often feel very, very enlightened because somehow she opens up a greater understanding, not only about Hawaii, but the greater natural world. She's a kumahula, a writer, educator, musician, and a dedicated community leader. So I'm just going to play her video really quickly as well.
I'm not Kikuhi Kanahele, Kanakaole. I am her mother, Pualani Kanahele. Kikuhi is a product of who I am, and that is the truth of the matter. The other truth of the matter is we who are born and raised on this island for not only this generation, but for many generations before us, are the product of Mauna Kea. And that particular truth has to do with how we look at Mauna Kea. Mauna Kea in its expansive space is looked at as an elemental form. And it's looked at as an elemental form because we look at all of our gods or as elemental forms. And so we have the winds, that's God's. We have the rains, that's God. We have the sun, that is a God. The moon, that is a God, and all phases of the moon. We have the ocean, that is a God. We have the land as a God. And this is because they are all what produces life. And therefore, they are our gods. Okay. I am the God of Kekui because I produced her. We gave her life. And so for this same equation, the mountain is our God. The mountain is our God because it exists in the zone of the elementals. It doesn't exist in the zone of the kahakai. The zone of the elementals has to do with where the cycles of our rain, where the cycles of our water comes from. Okay, so we live down here in the kahakai, but we're very well aware of the fact that our water is evaporating and where the clouds hit the mountain. We're very well aware of the fact that the mountain is the one that collects all of these clouds. These clouds eventually go back into our land, and eventually the water cycles continue. The water cycles continue not only as water cycle, but because of the sun, or the Kani Ika Viola. The idea of Kani Ika Viola is that Kani is the energy of heat. And the energy of heat comes from the middle of the earth. The energy of heat comes from the sun. And Kani is the one, the name itself says, Kani, or the energy of heat, is the one that produces water, that it gives life. So all of this idea of the energy and the production of that energy are all connected. And so when we say that we are the mountain, that's what we're saying. We are connected. We are the product of this land. We are the product of that parent that is our land. I am the product of my children. It is the same idea of products. The idea of the mountain is that it collects our water, and we see the snow up there every year, but the ahupua'a that the top of Mauna Kea is on is called Ka'ohe. And Ka'ohe runs all the way from Hamakua, covers the very top of the mountain of Mauna Kea, and then goes all the way to Mauna Loa. What this tells us is that this is the zone of Kani. Again, we're going back to the idea of Kani, the energy that produces water. Okay. But this is the zone of Kani because in giving the name of the ahupua'a the name of Ka'ohe, Ka'ohe is kinolau of Kani, but the ohe is the product that gathers water in itself. And so if we live in a bamboo forest, there's always water in the bamboo. The same idea was given to this particular land because the water gathers in this land. It is the ka'ohe. It is the ohe of this land. It is the place that we will find water always. And so when they said, at one time they said there's no water up on Pohakuloa, that according to my ancestors, this is ka'ohe. It will have water. And so they just found water up there. Big surprise. Wasn't a surprise to us because we believe in the words of our ancestors. They say this is ka'ohe to us. They say we are the products of this land. My children are the products of me. It's that same truth. It is a truth. And that's what we're fighting for. This is our soul. This is our way of life. This is not our job. You know, we don't earn money from doing this. But for generations after generations after generation, we will continue to do what we're doing today. Aloha.
Thank you.
Oops. Oh, sorry. Well, I guess that was a sign. I had one more slide on ahupua'a, but I was going to save it for later, for in case we had further discussion. So I'll do that. And then I also have some extra like slides and whatnot for like extra readings or movies in case other people are interested. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jane. So we're going to ask a couple questions after Sean presents, and then we'll go into the breakouts. So thank you so much for that. So Sean, I'd like to introduce Sean Connelly. And let me see, I know that you have a presentation that you had wanted to set up as well. You can feel free. And so he is an artist architect from Oahu. He directs his work through an independent studio practice after oceanic projects for architecture, landscape, infrastructure, and art. His combined work strives to promote justice advancing futures that address the dynamics of human geography today. Sean's work theoretically is about advancing an architectural history and theory of urbanism from Hawaii. His built conceptual works have included sculptural and video works exhibited at venues such as II Gallery, Honolulu Museum of Art, Foster Botanical Gardens, and Luggage Store Gallery. His most recent studio-driven works include Oahu 2450, the first 3D map of the United States militarization on the island of Oahu from 1887 to the present, as well as Ala Wai Centennial Memorial Project, a social practice in architecture about the history and future of Waikiki that runs from 2021 to 2027, which he's going to talk a little bit more about today. So welcome, Sean.
Thank you so much, Alex. And Jane, this is great. Thank you. And thank you for everybody attending for all your attention. Since land acknowledgements were made, in terms of my land acknowledgement, I would also like to acknowledge the sky and ocean because I am speaking to you from Hawaii in the Pacific, which is the world's most isolated landmass. And the immense technical feat for my voice to be transmitted hundreds of miles up into the sky, bouncing around the planet, going through tubes and cables into the ocean to connect to the continental United States. I think that is an important component of the land that I'd like to acknowledge as we also remember the importance of our sky and our ocean. So thank you. My plan for today is to set up our conversation with some information about an ongoing project I have called Ala Wai Centennial, which, as Alex mentioned, focuses on the, there we go, which focuses on the history and future of the Ala Wai Canal, which turns 100 next year. And it turns 100 in a time when tourism and the concept of the United States needs to be redefined. And to sort of tell you the end of the story now, the project Ala Wai Centennial, kind of emerges into this community-wide controversy with the United States Army Corps of Engineers, the city of Honolulu, and the state of Hawaii, which in 2019, I co-formed a nonprofit called Protect Our Ala Wai Watersheds with a group of local residents to, oh, of course my neighbor would decide to use the blower. One moment, let me see if I can quickly move to the other room. Okay. There we have it for Zoom, right? Work from home. Okay. Yes. Let's see, where was I? Co-formed a nonprofit to sue the city and state to halt this project, and we were successful in halting a portion of that project. So it's a tremendous honor to be able to share some of this work. But first, what is the Ala Wai Canal? So this is a picture of the island of Oahu, and outlined in red is the watershed that feeds the Ala Wai Canal, which is a part of the ahupua'a of Waikiki. This is looking into a close-up of the moku system of Waikiki, named Kona. So Kona was historically divided into several ahupua'a. And for ahupua'a on Oahu, it fits the sort of quintessential mold of mountain to sea. But it is important to acknowledge that not all ahupua'a fit that mold. The canal itself is shown here in red, this diagrammatic map, which is produced scientifically from GIS data and then brought into architectural software to render, shows the Ala Wai Canal again in red and its stormwater drain system in cyan. And the canal forms the inland and submerged coastal edge of Waikiki, which today is known famously as the tourist mecca of Hawaii, where each year 5.6 million tourists visit, generating 7 to 12% of Hawaii's GDP. However, before it became the tourist mecca, this before and after animation shows the historic wetland that was there. The namesake of the canal, Ala Wai, means waterway, translated from Hawaiian into English. However, despite its Hawaiian sounding name, it was named by the wife of one of the settlers, white settlers. And the canal was not made for water at all. It was made for urbanism. And the canal, however, carved from Hawaiian land, is uniquely American, as it was dredged by American businessman Dillingham under the charge of the US Territorial Government Board of Health to drain the wetlands of Waikiki for urbanization. And that this area historically was cultivated by Hawaiians and other farmers of color producing food for all of Hawaii, who were then displaced between 1921 and 1928 as the canal was dredged. Yet the canal was never fully completed according to its original plan. And ultimately it was left without the proper flood controls that were typically associated with canals built at the same time around the United States. And so, for example, in Seattle or in Boston, canal systems are usually equipped with some kind of mechanized flood management system. And as a result, today, for local residents that live and work around the canal or visit, the millions more tourists who have visited, and those who remain displaced, the Ala Wai Canal is ultimately a hurting scar. It is polluted and it is vulnerable to erosion and climate change. So Ala Wai Centennial, I only really have about 10 minutes left, but what I wanted to share was a clip from a video that was produced in October as part of our organization's event, our Protect Our Ala Wai Watersheds public forum on October 29th, which came out of an entire year of fighting this project through the conventional public engagement process. We testified, we went to the state legislature, the city legislature, and we weren't making any progress. The project was still being pushed through. And I'll explain a little bit about the project. Oh, I guess I'll quickly say about the project. Actually, hold on a second. There we go. I just have to zoom through the
last year 20 resources and keep them.
Oh, there we go.
Next to protect.
So this video is essentially a summary of Ala Wai Centennial concept. And this forum was presented sort of as a counter public engagement to the Army Corps project. The Army Corps project was a proposal that was created in the 1990s, and it takes about 20 years for the government to allocate funding. And so in 2018, finally, under the sort of promotion of climate change, $350 million of federal funding was approved to bring this project into fruition. which included the construction of 7 3-story detention basins in Makiki, Manoa, and Palolo streams, plus the construction of a 4 to 7 foot flood wall around the canal. And that would have destroyed thousands of feet of natural stream. So this video is a clip of a public presentation that I gave about the centennial.
In 2021, the Ala Wai Canal turns 100. So that's 2 years from now. The idea of Ala Wai Centennial is that we need a paradigm shift. And that paradigm shift with regards to how we adapt to climate change cannot be one where we militarize the climate. You'll hear people saying that we need to fight climate. We need to fight climate change. What we need to do is we need to celebrate climate change. We need to obey the climate, and we need to use climate change as our opportunity to recover our ahupua'a for the next 100 years. Whereas the current paradigm is to stop flooding and keep the water out, the new paradigm is that we need to adapt to climate change in a way that's going to protect our freshwater resources and keep them clean so that we can feed ourselves. It's a very difficult task because it's very developed here. But if you put all of the alternatives that we have talked about today together, you can sort of organize it into a system of 5 overarching issues. One is the ahupua'a as academy, productive forests and reef, retrofitting our currently channelized streams, the conversion of the Ala Wai golf course into the Waikiki Kalo field, and the installation of Kalia Dam, or a pump and lock system. If you go to www.alawaicentennial.org, you can see maps and diagrams. I'll go through some of them. This is a map of all the schools. The Ala Wai Canal is home to a watershed that has every single major educational institution in the state located here in this watershed. Every school within 0.25 miles or a 5-mile walk to the stream. This is a map looking at a connected system from mountain to ocean. We can consider that the kipuka of the urban environment. We have an idea of retrofitting our streams so that the water entering the canal is clean and reduced of sedimentation. We have a map here showing prioritized properties for potential storm green infrastructure based on property locations to inlets into the stormwater drain system shown in red. So every house, every street is connected to the stream via an underground stormwater network. Zooming into the area, coastal area around the Ala Wai Canal, the idea of Kalia Dam. So we just heard a presentation about a pump system. This is looking at a pump and lock system. Some might worry about the scale, but it's already scaled to the buildings. You can see the canoe going through. That's the hokulea. And along with the idea of installing these infrastructure components are all these soft infrastructure components like the programs. What if the Ala Wai Canal was so clean, we could have the Ala Wai Fishermen's Association. In combination with the Canoe Club, you can have community advocacy to make sure that the Ala Wai Canal stays clean so we can fish from it. This is a map, let's say in 100 years by the end of the centennial, look at Ala Wai Golf Course. That is Honolulu's largest open space. What does that say about our economy if our largest open space in Honolulu is a golf course? How would that change our economy over the next 100 years? If we turn that into something that we could use to feed ourselves, and then tourists can pay $25 to go have their adventure and eat kalo and feed Waikiki and keep all the kalo that's growing on the windward side for locals. This is a map showing the connectivity from mountain to ocean. Really the bigger picture of Ala Wai Centennial is that our chance for the next 100 years depends, our chance of survival depends on our ability to adapt to climate change in a way that's going to feed ourselves. And this Ala Wai Flood Management Project is not just about Waikiki. It's about all of Oahu and all of Hawaii. This is a traditional map of of the Ala Wai Canal, and I'm running out of time. So in terms of the bigger picture, ultimately what we have here is a social justice issue. This is a picture of Waikiki before it was filled in, before the Waikiki Reclamation Project, and shown here in red, if you can see it, are the fish ponds where Fort DeRussy was eventually constructed. Because in 1909, the Army Corps of Engineers was the first entity to fill in Waikiki. 12 years later, the Ala Wai Canal was built. This is the wetland today, the Ala Wai Canal. The red is Fort DeRussy. The value of Fort DeRussy is $4 billion, and it is the largest parcel in Waikiki. The next most valuable parcel is Royal Hawaiian, and guess how much that is? $650 million. That's how valuable Fort DeRussy is. I think it's time for reparations. Reparations for the militarization of this Aina. I'm out of time, so please visit Ala Wai Centennial for more information. There are a ton of resources in terms of GIS maps. The last one I wanted to end on is this map. We keep talking about flooding, this map right here. If you look at the census data, the real thing that we need to also talk about are all the people that are going to be affected by flooding. Everything shown in red are areas of poverty. And so we can't forget that this is not just about finance, this is about people. Mahalo.
So I definitely have more to share about Ala Wai Centennial. There was quite the controversy and quite the sort of blatant corruption that existed between the federal government, the city, the state, the media, and several sort of government-led institutions to promote this project. But with the interest of our conversation and time, I'll pass it back to Alex. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Sean. One thing I do regret also it being remote is that our EcoArt salons used to last until like we closed down the building. So our 20 minutes never really stayed 20 minutes as those who remember that situation. But thank you for that. I did want to ask a couple of questions with you and Jane. One thing I did want to just kind of seg into also, because Sean, you just spoke before I bring you together, is that you title your Ala Wai Centennial a memorial, and I was wondering what that conveys or what you were hoping that would convey.
Oh, thank you for bringing that up. The name of the project is Ala Wai Centennial, and there are different components, but I, called it the Ala Wai Centennial Memorial Project because I had this question in mind: is what if the Ala Wai Canal was considered a sacred place? The term wai is fresh water, and vai is wealth or value, and so I just was thinking about what would it change about infrastructure if this infrastructure is infrastructure because of the scale, and its scale impacts Earth's resources, and in this case it's water. So that was one thing, was architecturally trying to reimagine our infrastructure as these sort of like giving them a more sort of reverent quality, but then also in terms of the sort of social justice issues and the history of the canal. The memorial was sort of meant, I was inspired by other kind of land art and looking at particularly for this use of the term memorial, Maya Lin's reference to, a scar being carved into the earth to heal over time. And I really saw the canal as that sort of gesture. So that was sort of like the second reason. And then the third reason was kind of in terms of financing, and with my background in architecture and having learned about real estate development to a certain extent, and how projects are financed. Right now, infrastructure projects are usually paid for by taxpayer monies, but when you look at successful projects in other places, in other cities, oftentimes there's, another sort of civic component added onto it, which opens up a whole nother level of funding, particularly donation. And so the idea of the memorial was also to consider what are the other kinds of ways where we can, pool resources for this project, because it shouldn't. Right now, it's takes 20 years, and then the federal government has $350 million. But in order for us to unlock that funding, $125 million of taxpayer money has to be used for like the down payment of that loan. So there's this very sort of convoluted process of thinking about our built environment, but then also thinking about how it's financed and what are the ways that we can use our concepts to intervene. And lastly, with the idea of the memorial, thinking about the idea of military, because the long-term story of Ala Wai Centennial is definitely about the canal, but it's also about the militarization of Oahu. I didn't really get to show the 3D map of Oahu, but in the week previously, for the students that are here that saw that presentation, I showed you that video of the island rotating, showing the history of the military. And one thing to note is that in how I mentioned in 1909, the Army Corps is the first to fill in the fish ponds to create Fort DeRussy. That was based on a plan in 1906 to build the coastal fortification of Honolulu. So Fort DeRussy is one of the constellation of forts that were built to protect Honolulu and Pearl Harbor after the United States annexed illegally the Hawaiian Kingdom. So that's Fort DeRussy, Fort Armstrong, Fort Kamehameha at Pearl Harbor, and then also Diamond Head. So that was 1906. And adjacent to that plan was the 1906 plan for the Waikiki Reclamation Project. So, even though the canal was dredged in 1921, it was actually officially proposed alongside the construction of this fort system. And so, but then it was also proposed by the Territorial Board of Health. So there's this kind of like, we're kind of being duped. We're kind of being like tricked into thinking that there are all these separate entities like doing these separate things, but they're really actually coordinated. And when I tried to bring this up actually to the city, I got gaslighted, and they were saying things like, oh, this isn't a conspiracy theory. This isn't, I wish you wouldn't say that thing about white supremacy. It just isn't true about the canal and racism. And I'm not making any of it up at all. I'm literally quoting things from work like artists like Gay Chan and others who have been, talking about Ala Wai for quite some time. So that pretty much kind of is the long, short answer to the concept of the memorial as distinct, let's say, from like a monument.
Excellent, thank you. Actually, that kind of like makes me think a lot about how Jane, like you're working with your photography series, like with Mauna Kea, that we were able to see some of, and just like standing in front of the actual pieces. I mean, people get the idea of the size and like the impact of these very large images, and almost as if like they are sort of monumental, right? But also really the idea of the sacred and the mountain being sacred. I was just thinking, I have my Monono Duke with me and Recovering the Sacred, because I was just reading it. But really how Mount Graham in Arizona, they were going through the similar thing on Apache land, right? And really what happens, as Sean, you were saying that what happens if we think of water as sacred, but what happens, right, when these sacred spaces are not, respected, right? And so I'd love to bring in Jane and what you were doing with your photo series. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
I mean, I think with all my work, it's like really looking at how how things are viewed. I mean, I grew up in Los Angeles being educated, but like going to graduate school at UH Manoa for ocean engineering, like being exposed to these different conversations that weren't brought in. Like even, I think I've spoken about this before, like when you're learning about Native Americans in California, for instance, you're reading like Island of the Blue Dolphins. It's about, I believe, a Chumash girl, right? But this is written by like a Christian, an older white male who's Christian. That's not really an accurate representation, right? We do mission projects, for instance, in California too. And you know, this is like all of the land here in Los Angeles. You see like contemporary Spanish architecture, right? So Sean can verify this too, right? Spanish tile is the legacy of colonialism. The reason why we have Spanish tile in missions throughout California is because the Indians, Native Americans would shoot flaming arrows into the thatched roofs, and so they would go on fire. And so then the Spanish realized that, and so they put tile there. And so you see this entire architecture all across Southern California, that people want to have these like Spanish mission houses, and it replicates like colonialism. And so I think that understanding these things is something that we're not actually having enough conversation about. I mean, I think that there are, I feel really lucky, like Beatrice is here too, like all of us who are in the Honolulu Biennial have these things, and we happen to be educators, so we can have these conversations. But generally, when you have these conversations, people think that you're like a little bit crazy, or they don't want to believe you, or they're like, no, that's not the way that it is. And I mean, if we're like when you're talking about like the turn of the 19th century in the United States, like that's when that's like really the essence of when America becomes a dominant aggressor and a dominant colonialist. That's like when we're doing American expansionism across the Pacific, right? That's when we, you know, that's how we obtain Puerto Rico, the Philippines, Guam, like all these areas. So it's something that is actually planned out. You know, it's like I've presented with you about Pearl Harbor. That was very strategic. Pearl Harbor is a three-pronged bay, right? So anybody who possesses Pearl Harbor will essentially rule the Pacific because you can store your ships there. That's the reason why the Japanese come and bomb it from above. So I think that these like ideas of sacred, and then these ideas of, I mean, the American military has it too, right? But it's like a territorial thing. It's not thinking about how nature actually exists, or the environment or ecology exists, right? They're thinking about strategic ways of how to colonize and take over more land and take away from people, which is very different than sacred, but it's sacred to them, right? So learning these things about the environment, like I went to become an ocean resource engineer thinking that like I'd be doing a lot of like good for the environment, but instead I ended up like my job prospects were very, very like based on wanting to work for the Navy. And like that just was such a disconnect to me personally. So learning about all these things were incredibly important. And I think the reason why Hawaii is so important to me is because this is where I learned this information. It's like accessible. There are people who are speaking it. There are still people who are alive, who are living it, and they're sharing. And I just can't say enough about that. Yeah.
I mean, I have a million questions for you, but I'm going to stop here because I know everybody else wants to talk. So I'm going to thank you both so much for your presentations. And I have to say bye to the Facebook streaming folks. Like, sorry to leave you, but next time RSVP into the Zoom room if you can. But folks that are in the Zoom room, we're going to go into some breakout rooms. And so I'm going to give you the option so you can choose to jump into a room with Sean or with Jane. And you'll see it indicated, and it'll take me a couple seconds. So if you would just oblige with that, that would be really great, helpful.